So we're on the next section here of fertilizing palms and looking at the nutritional deficiencies that many of them have here. I guess a good subtitle for this would be the pain and the agony that many palms feel living in our very inert Florida soils. So now that we know that the very basics of palm anatomy and growth, we will next discuss nutritional deficiencies. First, the symptoms and then how to correct them. The problem with our most common nutrient deficiencies is that once the leaf has the symptoms, it is too late to correct the deficiency on that particular leaf. That leaf will continue to exhibit those nutrient deficiencies until it's pruned off from the canopy or it dies naturally. Um, what we are doing with corrective fertilization is supplying the new leaves in development that are emerging. I guess you remember that spiral leaf spear with more of the needed nutrients. It can take 3 years or more to correct some nutritional problems for potassium, for example, as it usually takes at least that long to replace the entire canopy. However, due to potassium deficient soils and soils with low cation exchange capacity, to name a few problems, preventing deficiencies can be a very long and difficult process. So these are the 4 primary nutrient deficiencies observed in the landscape here in Florida. More palms die from nutrient deficiencies and excessive pruning than from diseases or insects. The letter in parentheses are the chemical symbols for these nutrients. You can go back to the chemistry you might have had at one point or another. And while many of the photos that we're going to show here will demonstrate one nutritional deficiency, it's pretty common to observe multiple deficiencies in one palm at a time. So while many of the photos that we're going to show will illustrate only one nutritional deficiency at a time, it's pretty common to observe multiple deficiencies in like the same palm at the same time. And so some of the terms that I want to just go over here real quick are necrosis. Necrosis means the tissue is dyed, and the leaf tissue is gray or brown because it's dead, and it won't ever become green again. Chlorosis is the tissue is losing chlorophyll, and a chlorotic leaf is a leaf that is turning from light green to potentially bright yellow. Typically, and this is caused by nitrogen and iron deficiencies for the most part. So here's a photo demonstrating 2 deficiencies occurring at once on Canary Island date palms. The lower leaves, you can see they're becoming necrotic. They're starting to turn brown. And this is what happens in time with potassium deficiency. And if you look at the mid canopy, you'll see yellow tips and leaflets, and this is magnesium deficiency. This is particularly common in the Phoenix palms. So not just the Canary Island Phoenix palms, but wild date palm tends to do this. The pygmy date palms as well. So, and also in the background here, note these 2 palm trees and how small their canopies are. These palms will eventually die from nutrient deficiency. So bringing this around to the anatomy and physiology of palms, the oldest leaves in the canopy or crown are at the bottom, and the youngest leaves are typically at the top. And for each individual leaf, the oldest portion is the distal or tip of the leaf. So the oldest part of the leaf is at the end. And knowing which leaves are youngest versus oldest and which part of the individual leaf is youngest versus oldest will be important when we discuss nutritional deficiencies. And we divide nutrients into macronutrients and micronutrients. And that's based on the quantity of each one that a plant needs. Macronutrients and micronutrients are both important for plant growth. And for macronutrients, a plant needs pounds, whereas micronutrients, a plant just needs ounces. In general, though, macronutrient deficiencies in palms are most severe on the oldest. So that's the lowest branches and leaves in the canopy. And micronutrient deficiencies are observed in the younger leaves. For an individual leaf, macronutrient deficiency symptoms are mostly expressed on the oldest distal portion of the leaf, which would be the leaf tip, whereas micronutrient deficiency symptoms are expressed on the newest or the basal portion of the leaf. So the ever-present potassium deficiency. It's the most severe on lowest and old leaves and towards the tips of the affected leaves. And potassium, it's a macronutrient for palms. Almost all palms in Florida exhibit potassium deficiency in some shape or form, even those in natural areas, because virtually all the soils in Florida are deficient in potassium. So potassium is the letter K, NPK. So macronutrients are mobile elements, meaning that the palm can move the nutrient where it needs it the most within the palm itself. For potassium, the plant is moving the element from the oldest leaves to the growing point of the palm. So it's constantly translocating potassium from the older parts into the newer parts as it's creating new growth. And the palm is trying to keep itself alive, so it's sacrificing its old leaves to maintain the new ones, basically. That's why you see potassium deficiency symptoms in the lowest leaves in the canopy. At least that's where the strongest indications of it are. So it can be a little tricky diagnosing potassium deficiency because symptoms vary depending on the palm species. However, for most palms, we observe a translucent yellow or yellow-orange spotting or black spotting on the leaves, which leads to marginal and or leaf tip necrosis. So here's some pictures of classic potassium deficiency. Notice how it's pretty spotty. You've got these little necrotic spots that can occur. You can see that the leaf is becoming somewhat translucent. And note in the lower right-hand photo, the leaf tips are becoming necrotic. That's pretty common for a lot of species as well. So here's some more pictures of what potassium deficiency looks like. General yellowing, with the older portions of the leaves becoming increasingly necrotic. So for some palm species, like this fishtail palm, you might see black or necrotic spots on the leaflets due to the potassium deficiency. Again, this looks very similar to leaf spot disease. And however, leaf spot symptoms due to disease often have yellowing, a yellow halo with them. You would see like basically a yellow margin going all the way around the spot, the dark spot in the area. And potassium deficiency does not do this. So again, just to point out that the potassium is mobile through the plant, and it's constantly trying to move it from the older portions of the plant to the newer portions, so that the newer leaves can have healthy growth. And so you can see it, these are older branches, and it's more severe the closer you get to the tips. Like this is the older portion of it towards the tip, and then like towards the base, it's a little greener towards the base of this leaf. And you can see here's another extreme example. The leaf rachis remains green, and it's the last part of the leaf to become necrotic. So the top photo illustrates natural senescence or natural death of the oldest leaf in a palm canopy. It can occur over just a few days. The leaf will be green one day and then turn bronzy like the next day. And the next day, and it'll turn completely necrotic on the following day. So note here that with natural senescence, the entire leaf turns the color. The petiole, the rachis, and the leaflets. And this is in pretty big contrast with this bottom photo here, which illustrates a severe potassium deficiency. The petiole and the rachis are still green, but the leaflets are dying. They're necrotic. And potassium deficient leaf may stay in this half dead state for weeks or even months until it dies naturally or is removed because it's unsightly. So anytime you see a half dead leaf in the palm canopy, you're probably observing potassium deficiency and not a natural death of the leaf. So here's an interesting photo. This palm, in theory, should have at least 6 leaves, but because it's severely potassium deficient, the palm is taking potassium from the oldest leaves and keeping the youngest leaves alive. And so you can see the deficiency symptoms on the lowest leaves here. And matters are made worse when gardeners cut off the ugly lower leaves. And in doing so, they're basically robbing the plant of a source of nutrients. And ultimately, this palm will die due to the lack of potassium. Excessive pruning does not cause nutrient deficiencies, but it is interconnected with nutrient deficiencies of mobile elements when the still living leaves, and so therefore photosynthesizing leaves, are cut off for basically aesthetic purposes. So here's some other potassium deficiency symptoms. You can see the trunks tapering. They start moving towards a pencil point. Fewer leaves in the canopy than normal for that of it's typical of the palm species. Take notice of this palm in the background. The trunk is tapered excessively, this pencil point, and it's got a very small canopy due to the potassium deficiency. So I guess a note here says that it died about 6 weeks after this photograph was taken. So, and something to keep in mind is that flora soils are naturally deficient in potassium, but potassium deficiency is often induced by improper fertilization. So magnesium deficiency is also another macronutrient deficiency for palms. And this means that palms with symptoms of magnesium deficiency will be the most severe on the oldest and lowest leaves of the canopy. Necrotic tissue is not observed within this deficiency. Rather, it's a bright yellow color that develops at the margins of the leaflets or the leaves. If it's particularly severe, the only green portion of the leaf will be in the middle. So here's a contrast between palms exhibiting only magnesium deficiency, the yellow margins, and the palms that would be only exhibiting potassium deficiencies. So you can see that you've got the browning and necrosis going on with those with potassium deficiency. So here's another comparison on the same species. You've got magnesium with the yellow margins and potassium deficiency with the browning necrosis that occurs. And in particular, the Phoenix date palm, Canary Island date palm, will show this magnesium deficiency all the time. And it can be induced to most other palms by improper fertilization. So here's the same picture we used earlier, showing the magnesium deficiency in the mid canopy here, where there isn't really any necrosis occurring yet. It's just the yellowing of the edges. But the further you move down, the more that potassium deficiency shows up, and you've got the necrosis on the edges of the leaves also occurring. So this is an extreme example of potassium and magnesium deficiency occurring in the same palm at the same time. The lower half of the canopy is necrotic leaves due to potassium deficiency, and the upper half of the canopy has bright yellow leaves due to magnesium deficiency. So now we're moving into micronutrients here, and manganese is one that can show up quite a bit. It's pretty important because if it's severe enough, it will kill the palm. And it typically affects the youngest leaves, and these would be the leaves at the very top of the canopy. Remember that a new leaf will become a mid-canopy leaf and then an old leaf over time because more leaves are produced over time. So once the symptoms of manganese deficiency are present in a new leaf, the leaf will remain asymptomatic for the entire life of that leaf, even if you apply manganese. So therefore, the symptom is still present when that leaf is considered an old leaf at the bottom of the canopy. So also because it is a micronutrient deficiency, the symptoms are usually worse at the base of the leaf, the youngest portion rather than the leaf tip. So for manganese deficiency, not only is there interveinal chlorosis, but there's also necrotic streaking that occurs in the same leaf. This chlorosis and necrosis together define the manganese deficiency. In the really severe cases, you'll have what's called frizzle top. It'll look very frizzly, and if the severe deficiency state is not corrected, the apical meristem, basically the bud or the heart of the palm, will die. The older leaves will remain green until they die naturally, but no new leaves will be produced. So in these leaflets here, they're exhibiting both interveinal chlorosis and interveinal necrosis, which is more common on the feather leaf palms than on the fan palms. So here in the top left, you've got a Phoenix Robolini pygmy date palm with manganese deficiency. It's on most of the young leaves. And note that the leaflets at the base of the leaf, which are most affected, so you could see like closer to the end compared to the outside portions. And on the right-hand side, I wanted to illustrate the difference between manganese and potassium. You can see that for manganese, that you've got a lot of the necrosis occurring at the base of the leaf and on the newer leaflets, basically. And for potassium, it was towards the edge. So you can see it's greener towards the base. So it's the opposite of the potassium deficiency is what you'll see in manganese deficiency. So the photo on the left-hand side here is an example of frizzle top. It's the very severe manganese deficiency, but note that the oldest leaves look normal relative to the top, newer portions of the plant. The photo on the right is an example of a queen palm with both potassium and manganese deficiency. So boron deficiency. This is another one. It's a micronutrient. It's required in very small quantities by palms, but it is also very essential. There are multiple symptoms associated with boron deficiency, but all will occur on the newest leaves and will cause the leaves to palm look odd. So you'll see here in some of the examples what that looks like. In most cases, the symptoms are minor, but the deficiency can be severe that it so severe that it causes the palm to bend, or it kills the apical meristem, the bud, entirely before it kills the palm. This slide is a list of some of the symptoms that can be observed So affecting the newest leaf, stunted new leaves, multiple incomplete opened spear leaves, an accordion almost look to the leaf, abortion of flowers and fruit, uh, strange growth horizontally, and then eventually death of the meristem. So, as with manganese deficiency, the symptoms remain with the leaf as the leaf moves down the canopy, moves, and therefore, if the symptom is mild, you may not even notice it until that leaf moves down into the old leaf position. However, the symptoms originally appeared when the leaf was new. So the coconut palm on the left-hand side has about 6 to 7 unopened new leaves, and adding boron will not force these leaves to open. They will remain like this until the leaves naturally die or they are removed from the canopy. Um, as will be explained again later on, nutrient applications do not eliminate symptoms present. Rather, the applications provide nutrients to the leaves in the development and emerging from the apical meristem or the bud of the palm. The queen palm here on this right-hand photo on the right is also has unopened leaves. The white arrow is pointing at the newest leaf spear. The orange arrow is pointing at the next youngest leaf. It has partially opened at the top, but the rest of the leaf will never fully expand. So here are some photos of the accordion leaf symptom. The photo on the left illustrates a mild accordion leaf, and only the tips of it are affected, whereas the photo on the right illustrates a severe accordion leaf symptom, where the entire leaf is reduced in size and looks like an accordion squeezed together. So one of the earliest symptoms of mild transient boron deficiency is hook leaf, as shown in this top left photo. The leaflet tips are so tightly bent that if one attempts to straighten them out, they will tear instead. Often these hook leaflets will fall off, leaving the shortened leaflet tips, and the symptom can occur anywhere along the leaf from the base to the tip of the leaf. Since primordial palm leaves are staggered in size, a temporary boron deficiency may affect more than one leaf at the same time. And although this Bismarckia on the bottom left shows the effects of 2 boron deficiency episodes, you can see it with the second one affecting the middle, and the other parts affecting this part at the end. So boron deficiency can cause excessive auxin production. So auxin's a plant hormone, and therefore in palms, this will show up as sharp bending of individual leaves or the entire crown. Bending of a single leaf, as shown here, suggests a severe leaching of boron due to very heavy rainfall when this leaf was developing 4 to 5 months ago. And subsequent leaves may emerge normally. However, if the entire crown begins to bend, as shown in the next slide, this suggests a chronic boron deficiency that has been going on for many months or even years. So, one of the things that's kind of weird about boron is it can get washed away pretty easily, but it can naturally replenish itself as it becomes more available in the soil after a severe rain event. So it can be kind of strange when these symptoms show up. They can kind of correct themselves if they're not too severe sometimes. So one of the more interesting things about boron deficiency is that it affects the geotropism of the palm, how the palm orients itself. And normally they grow away from gravity, but severe boron deficiency upsets that auxin production in the palm, and the canopy starts to grow sideways. Sometimes it can grow so severe for a long period of time that it starts to grow downward. So these palms aren't dead. In fact, they are starting to recover. If you looked on the left-hand side, the oldest leaf is this one right here towards the base. It's the most symptomatic of boron deficiency. But you can see that each successive leaf coming out here has become more and more normal. So what causes the deficiencies? There are a number of things that can cause them, but this slide lists the primary ones. So first, there's simply insufficient nutrients in the soil. This is definitely the case with potassium. Florida in general tends to be low in nutrients besides phosphorus. And unfortunately, palms require considerable potassium to be free of deficiency symptoms at the lower canopy. Second, nutrients may be available in the soil, but they are present in an unavailable form. One reason for this occurrence is pH. As we've gone over, ideal pH is typically 5.5 to 6.5. Finding soil with ideal pH can be difficult in Florida. In South Florida, you've got lots of alkaline soils, and the solubility of most elements decreases greatly, and deficiencies in nutrients such as manganese can result. So there are all sorts of causes for nutrient deficiencies, but on the slide, we're going to go over the main ones. First, simply insufficient nutrients in the soil. So just whether those nutrients are there or not. This is pretty much generally the case with potassium throughout all of the state. Unfortunately, palms require considerable potassium to be free of deficiency symptoms in the lower canopy. So that's why almost anytime you see a palm, it's going to have that problem. Second, nutrients may be available in the soil, but they are present in unavailable form. So one reason for this is pH. pH can lock and unlock various nutrients depending on chemically what's going on there. So the ideal pH range for most nutrients is in the range of 5.5 to 6.5. Finding soils with an ideal pH can be difficult in Florida. In South Florida, there's often alkaline soils, things tend to be a little bit more on the acidic side in most of the sandy areas for the rest of the state. So, and another reason nutrients may be present but unavailable in the soil is due to complexations with phosphates or with organic matter. The primary issue observed is with commercial sewage-based fertilizers, specifically, a lot of people know about Milorganite. These products physically bind to the nutrients, in particular manganese, and can limit their availability within the soil. And the other situation that you can potentially run into is nutrient balance. And so if there is an imbalance, it is important to remember that too much of one nutrient can affect the uptake or utilization of another nutrient. There are numerous examples of competitive antagonism between various nutrients. In particular, nitrogen and potassium, potassium and magnesium, and manganese and iron. So as we'll discuss further, this is why it's recommended to use a complete balanced fertilizer for palms. So here's an example of a palm that's undergoing deficiency of manganese due to the introduction of Milorganite that was incorporated into the backfill when this palm was transplanted. So this is part of an experiment, I believe, that Dr. Brochat was doing. So he's the source for a lot of this material here. So here's an example of cabbage palms that are suffering from severe potassium deficiency. Only a few healthy new leaves remain at the top of the canopies. And it was induced by applying high nitrogen turf type fertilizer to the turf grass below the palms. And the high nitrogen forced new growth that was not supported by the amount of potassium. and in the soil or the fertilizer. This caused the existing potassium with the palm canopies to become diluted and resulted in a worsening of the already existing potassium deficiency. So not shown in this photo were two other cabbage palms that had already died from this potassium deficiency. So here's another very similar situation to the last slide. The turf looks wonderful. It's quite green, doing really well. But these palms are also having potassium deficiency. And so you can think about this like in your HOA, if you live somewhere within an HOA, that because of what goes on in your neighbor's yard, even it can impact the palms in your yard, even though like you might be using some of these more specific palm management strategies, that these palms can still be affected by high nitrogen because of how far their roots can reach out in other people's yards. So something to keep in mind. So the take-home lesson here that we really want you to take from all of this is applying appropriate fertilizer will not eliminate the leaf nutritional deficiency symptoms shown in these photos, for example. So, you've got the magnesium deficiency on this Phoenix palm, and in the upper right-hand photo, you've got a boron deficiency. Lower right hand, and in the upper right hand, you've got a manganese deficiency. So fertilization is targeted at new leaves in development in the apical meristem, the bud, and eventually the palm canopy will be nutrient deficiency symptom free, but it takes a lot of time. Micronutrients deficiencies usually can be solved within 6 months to a year, but macronutrient deficiencies might take multiple years to clear up. So what we want to point out here is that if you are doing landscape fertilization for turf, which the big ones, big elements that you want to include for making your grass greener are nitrogen and iron. And then if you also have some regime for broadleaf trees and shrubs, generally you're going to cover most of the stuff that palms need in order to be healthy as well. So the only thing that really stands out here that might be a little bit different is boron for palms. So here are the reasons why we suggest if palms are part of the homeowner landscape, the best results will be obtained using a single fertilizer for the mixed landscape. Most homeowner landscape soils, especially in coastal areas, are native soils. The same is probably true if your home is located near a man-made lake. These areas had to be raised a lot of the time above potential flood levels. So fill soil was dredged from the lakes or brought in from elsewhere in Florida to increase the height of the area. If you were lucky, a good soil for growing plants was placed on top of this called fill soil, on top of this fill soil. But this isn't always the case. Even if it has been added, it might have just been a few inches. So as indicated when palm roots were described earlier in this presentation, they can reach out 50 feet from the trunk. They do not stop at the edge of the canopy. Also, the fine roots that take up water with nutrients are located in the top 6 inches of soil, which means they are coexisting with other plant roots. So they're actively competing a lot of the time with turf roots. So a proper palm fertilizer must have the appropriate ratio of nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium. Note that we are not concerned particularly with phosphorus. Phosphorus deficiency is very rare in palms. In Florida soils in general, we tend to have enough of it in most places. As mentioned previously, the nutrients have to be kept in a balance with each other, though. And research has determined that this is the best ratio, this 2 to 3 to 1 ratio for maintaining proper palm growth. And the fertilizer must also contain the correct sources of individual nutrients. And fertilizers used in the landscape are a mixture of individual nutrients. These nutrients can be supplied from a wide variety of sources. So more than 20 years of research has determined which sources are the most effective here for our Florida soils.
These materials are effective in all Florida soils, whether high alkaline or acidic, whether sandy or in limestone, like in South Florida. However, each landscape is different. Each palm in a landscape may also have different needs. And the palm fertilizer developed is the base material. So in some situations, additional fertilizer may be needed to correct a very severe deficiency. The palm fertilizer must be applied correctly and adequate amounts must be applied, both of which will be discussed here shortly. So as I kind of mentioned, the desired nitrogen, potassium, magnesium ratio is 2 to 3 to 1. And that's found within some of these mixes. There's 8 to 12 for magnesium with micronutrients, or 8 0 12 for. So that 0, the phosphorus, just isn't even in there at all. And so when we're talking about palm fertilization, we're using a fourth number, and that's to emphasize the importance of magnesium for these palms in the landscape. So, however, the ratio is only one part of the effective palm fertilizer. There's 8 to 12 for magnesium palm fertilizers that will eventually kill your palm. And there are 8 to 12 for magnesium palm fertilizers that will neither harm nor really help your palms. Then there are 8 to 12 for magnesium palm fertilizers that do not meet the specifications based on UF-IFAS research. So in other words, the ratio of nitrogen to potassium and magnesium is important, but the source and form of each of these nutrients is also very important. The nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, the macronutrients must be within 100% control released forms. And the release are relatively the same rate over 3 months. And the form of the micronutrients depends on the individual micronutrient. The boron should be 100% controlled release form. Manganese, copper, and zinc should be in sulfate forms, which happen to be soluble. And scientists have searched for control release manganese sources that fit required specifications, but the search has not really been successful so far. Iron should be in a chelate form, which is a special type of chemical compound. And details on all of this can be found on this EDIS document labeled "Palm Fertilizers Are Not Created Equal." So under average rainfall and irrigation conditions in Florida, a water-soluble fertilizer will usually be completely solubilized within 2 weeks and completely leach through the root zone within 4 weeks. If it is applied every 3 months, palms will be without any nutrient in the soil for at least 2 months. So this is why we recommend using the control-released fertilizers for many Florida landscapes. More than 20 years of palm fertilizer research from Dr. Brochat went into finding the correct types of sources of fertilizers, nutrients to use. And so any control released nitrogen form is acceptable. For sulfur-coated potassium sulfate is preferred for the potassium source, although currently most sulfur-coated potassium sulfates are only coated with a polymer. Over continuing use, the polymer coating is acceptable. For magnesium, the only form of magnesium that is control released is a special form called magnesium sulfate. It's called pearled kesserite or grand kesserite. You're most familiar with magnesium sulfate as Epsom salts typically, but Epsom salt, it's water soluble. Kesserite is a special magnesium sulfate rock that is mined from Germany. As mentioned previously, for manganese should be present as manganese sulfate, sometimes referred to as Tech manganese. A fertilizer which contains manganese oxide or manganese sucrate is not acceptable for use in the landscape, as these materials either do not release the manganese at all or do so too much too slowly to be effective. For iron, the form that we often want to be able to use is called a chelated form. The best form is mixing called tracholine. So it's a copyrighted form, which is an iron chelate attached to clay so that it flows and mixes well. There's also FeDTA or FeDDHA alone in our powders. So never use a product containing iron oxide, which is essentially rust and is not water soluble. For boron, there are fertilizers composed of sodium borate, and there's a copyrighted form called Grainabor, which is a slow release form. Where do you find this special 8-2-12 for magnesium mix for palms, or potentially the 0 if there's no phosphorus? So more than a dozen companies formulate the appropriate palm fertilizer, but if it is not easy for individual homeowners to find, and it's not carried in any of the big box stores, the fertilizer is readily available to professional landscapers by either the manufacturers or by the fertilizer distributors. However, at the time of the writing of this PowerPoint, which is January 2018, homeowners can buy the appropriate palm fertilizers at SiteOne landscape supply outlets. From what I've heard, there have been shortages of it this year due to COVID, but down the road, I think that'll be addressed. And I've also heard that SiteOne currently still has it as well. There are also independent garden stores that sell the appropriate material, but read the label to be sure the individual nutrient sources that make up the fertilizer are correct. 100% control release sources of nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium. All of the potassium is present as polymer-coated sulfate or potash. All of the magnesium is present as magnesium sulfate in the form of Kesserite. This is what the 8-2-12 4 magnesium palm fertilizer that meets the specifications or recommended looks like. So down here, and the very large prills are the Kesserite, and the control release form of magnesium sulfate. So note, this is not an endorsement of one fertilizer manufacturer or distributor. At the presentation was developed at this one point and in January 1st, 2018. So fertilizer labels, a very fun topic, and they're very confusing. They are written to meet fertilizer laws, which are not user-friendly. However, the labels have to be written to conform to the law. And from a homeowner or professional landscaper perspective, the most important section is the section that provides the names of nutrient sources outlined in this blue box area here. So you've got polymer-coated urea as your source for nitrogen. You've got polymer-coated sulfate of potash for your source of potassium, which is the control release potassium sulfate source. Let's see, magnesium sulfate, it listed Kesserite. And for copper, you've got the copper manganese are included as in the sulfate forms: copper sulfate, manganese sulfate, zinc sulfate. And the iron EDTA, which is a chelated form of iron. Boron is present as sodium boron and a sodium borate, pardon me, which could be present as a water-soluble form or in a control release form. And then I guess for the specific example, we happen to know that it is the Grainabor. So a good control release form. So if you live in a condominium association or a homeowner association or other group that routinely asks for bids for fertilizer, you have to be very specific regarding the fertilizer you want to use in the landscape for palms. You can't simply state that we want palms or landscaping fertilized with X or X times per year with this type of palm fertilizer. Adding to the document that the palm fertilizer should be 8-2-12 for magnesium or 8-0-12 for magnesium palm fertilizer, it's not enough. You could easily receive 3 bids that will vary significantly from each other. In most cases, the lowest bid will be using a bad palm fertilizer containing water-soluble nutrients of nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, because these water-soluble forms are much less expensive than the control release forms. You want to be sure when you are comparing bids, you are comparing prices for the correct palm fertilizer as well within the bid. So here's a good form of, if you're putting in for a bid, what your specifications should look like with all of the sources of the nutrients listed as well, the various forms that are acceptable to you. So we have determined the correct ratio of nutrients and the sources needed to supply these nutrients in a palm fertilizer. How much of the fertilizer should be applied and how often? So generally we talk about these broadcasts of 15 pounds of the 8-2 or 0-12-4 magnesium fertilizer should be applied to 1,000 square feet or of landscape or canopy area. This is equal to 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet. This is not 15 pounds of nitrogen, but 15 pounds of the particular fertilizer. And remember that palm roots can extend 50 feet. If you are fertilizing turf grass where the palm or palms are growing, you may need to reduce the amount of use on the turf grass based on the turf grass nitrogen requirements in your area. So this palm-specific form of fertilizer is not harmful to turf grass or any other landscape plants because the sources of nitrogen, potassium, magnesium are control release materials. In fact, palm field nurseries would normally use twice the amount, but they are trying to grow palms particularly quickly, whereas in the landscape, you're just simply trying to maintain the palms that are present. This amount should be applied every 3 months. In the northern third of Florida, where it gets a little colder, the winter fertilization could probably be skipped. So we might be a little bit on the edge here too in central Florida. The fertilizer should be applied by broadcasting, which we'll discuss here as well. So if you can't use the correct fertilizer, it's better not to use any fertilizer at all for palms. It can be a waste of money because you can potentially be harming the palm too, like as we've shown based on some of those ratios and how basically like too much nitrogen a lot of the time can impact palms, and some of these other ratios can get out of whack as well. But generally, you're just flushing your money into the below ground or into our waterways here if you're having to apply fertilizer that isn't needed specifically for the palms. So here are 2 queen palms in 2 different backyards. Both palms were planted at the same time. The palm on the left has been fertilized with UF IFAS recommended palm fertilizer. The palm on the right has not. So which palm would you prefer to have in your landscape? So this is an example that was provided from Sarasota County. So some municipalities and counties have limits regarding the use of phosphorus and nitrogen. Here in Central Florida, I think most of our counties here that are like part of this training have a lot of restrictions. However, you need to know that ordinances regulating fertilizer in your area as local ordinances may vary. And first, many companies manufacture 8-0-12-4 with micronutrients. It is exactly the same as the 8-2-12-4 magnesium palm fertilizer, but without any of the phosphorus. Some, but not all, of the companies also manufacture fertilizer with the ratio of 0-0-16-6. So that can be particularly helpful and it also has micronutrients with it. And this has everything that the 8-0-12-4 and the 8-2-12-4 magnesium fertilizer does, except no nitrogen and no phosphorus. The potassium and magnesium are kept in the appropriate balance. You would use the same rate of 8-0-12-4 magnesium fertilizer that is used for the 8-2-12-4 magnesium fertilizer, 15 pounds of fertilizer per 100 square feet. This slide indicates the suggested scheduling for the 0-0-16-6 fertilizer so that you can comply with the summer blackout period of nitrogen and phosphorus. The amount of 0,0166 magnesium is the same, 15 pounds of fertilizer per 1,000 square feet. A 0,0166 magnesium fertilizer can be also used to mitigate the damage of turf type fertilizer, which has either more nitrogen than potassium in the fertilizer ratio or has controlled release nitrogen, but the potassium is also water soluble. Here we got a list of potential fertilization methods. The big takeaway here is broadcasting is the best method. Some of these others have issues. So an example, banding fertilizer will be shown in a moment, but fertigation is often used as on golf courses. Small amounts of nutrients are applied via the irrigation system, and that might work well on a golf course, but this is not really appropriate for landscapes, which do not need irrigation as often, and usually not at all during the summer during rainy months. Injections. Some people think that by injecting fertilizers deep into the soil that they will bypass the turfgrass roots and feed only the palm roots. But if you remember from some of the old slides, most of the palm roots that take up nutrients and water in the top 6 inches or so of the soil and are intermingled with the other plant roots. So especially the turf grass. And thus soil injection is not as an efficient method of palm fertilization. Furthermore, these products are normally water soluble and materials that quickly leach into the ground during rainy season. So here's an example of 2 broadcast fertilizer spreaders. The one on the left is held in your hand, and the one on the right you push around. While it might be tempting, flinging fertilizer with your hands is not as accurate as what these devices can do in terms of homogeneously spreading fertilizer in the landscape. So just placing a band of fertilizer around the palm trunk as shown in this slide means a very limited portion of the root system will be fertilized. Fertilizer moves down, not sideways, and material should be spread so that the entire bed is covered with the fertilizer. As long as you are using a palm fertilizer that's 100% control released of nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium, you will not harm other plants in the landscape. However, any fertilizer which contains iron, including the palm fertilizer, should be brushed or washed off the sidewalks or driveways and other hardscapes because iron can stain these hardscape surfaces. So just a reminder, the dangers of improper fertilization can be prevented by using the palm fertilizer in the entire landscape. If this is not possible, remember that there's the 0,0166 magnesium, which can be used to mitigate the damage of turf grass fertilizers. So just another reminder that nutrients must be kept in balance and that a complete fertilizer containing all the necessary nutrients should be used rather than a single nutrient fertilizer.